Yeah, so I'm Gaël Forget, and I'm going to give this presentation on behalf of the group. I should say, Jao was supposed to be here, was going to give it, and so I'm stepping in, so be patient with me a bit. So this is about a workshop that happened earlier this year that we organized to bring together a community interested in working and developing Julia software related to Earth observation. So the name of the workshop was Global Workshop on Earth Observation with Julia 2023. This is the team that organized the workshop. So Jao, that I've already mentioned, Iga, we just heard from, Adriano and Andre. The main sponsor and the host for the workshop was the Air Center, which the workshop took place in the Azores, where they are located. And here we also have listed our sponsors and funders. So in this presentation, I'm going to give you an overview of the workshop and then tell you more about what you will find in the GitHub repository and so on that you can reuse and exploit, and what came out of the workshop essentially. I'll show a couple of the notebooks as examples to give you a flavor, and then I will conclude. So let me start with this. So this is an image of the JuliaEO website that you will find at the address that's listed at the bottom, aircenter.github.io/JuliaEO. There's also a QR code that you can follow to get to the same web page. As you see, or maybe it's hard to read from a distance, but there is a Slack channel that we have used where you can contact us, and a few other things that are listed on this web page, video content, GitHub, and then data sets that are all archived from the workshop. The workshop in now I'm hearing, okay. So the workshop took place over a period of 5 days, and this was in January at the beginning of the year in Terceira, Azores. We ran 28 different sessions, and each one of them generated notebooks or involved notebooks, either being presented or in kind of a hands-on mode. I will get into the specifics in a minute, so I'm going to keep this part brief. We covered a lot of different topics that we saw, or the organizing committee saw as sort of making for a software ecosystem for folks interested in Earth observations, going from Julia basics and visualization to more specific topics like geospatial data and SAR processing that we heard about, also touching on machine learning, AI, big data, and stuff like that. So this was a workshop where we wanted to really originally bring developers of packages and train new ones. So 2/3 of the presenters of the speakers were lead developers of packages. You're going to see their name listed in a minute. And then a third was more beginner level. So that was an interesting dynamic ultimately to have both of those crowds. We also had a option to attend online. And so we had about 300 total, so we were very happy with the amount of enthusiasm we saw for this workshop. And in person, we were about 40. So I've included a little picture here to give you a sense of, this was a nice venue for a workshop. Also a pretty, enthusiastic and happy crowd. But mostly what I want to highlight here is that this was a community building effort, and I think it was very successful in that way. So we brought together all of those people, and we had them, some of them had been developing software together for years, and apparently that's the first time they met in person, so we were quite happy to have done that in person. For the follow-up to this event, we're not sure whether we'll do it in person or virtual, but I think in this case it was really useful. So moving on. So I'm going to dig deeper now into the outcomes of the workshop, the contents. So the first thing is all of the sessions were recorded, so you can view them after the fact. They all have been recently curated and kind of cleaned up a bit to improve the viewer experience. So now you find all of them that are listed here on the left. So this is small, but we are going to see it in big in a minute. On the YouTube channel from the Air Center, so there is again a QR code there. This is youtube.com/@aircenter playlists. And so there you will find for each of the session a specific video recording, including one that's not listed here, but that will tell you about how you may want to run the notebooks that come with the different sessions. How do you find the notebooks themselves? So for this, maybe the best place is to go to the GitHub, right? Again, it's listed here at the bottom. So this is now aircenter/JuliaEO/ and in this case the README, and a QR code. So there you will find another link to back to the website, the videos and so on, but then the notebooks themselves. The last piece of kind of setup, if you like, is how can you run them without having to install things yourself? So it's totally fine to go on the GitHub and get the notebooks for yourself and download them in your native Julia environment. In the context of this workshop, we wanted to avoid having to deal with everybody having different environments, so we kind of provided one. So this is what this web page, this slide represents. So we reused something that I had done in the Julia Climate organization. This web page that you see at the top here has a little binder link. So that is a reproducible environment that you can just run in the free cloud provider called mybinder.org. So it's a great resource, but it's limited in terms of CPU and memory, so it doesn't get you very, very far. However, you can do the exact same thing on your machine. That is, instead of running the cloud instance in the cloud, you kind of run the cloud instance on your machine through this thing called Docker. And so that's what we did for this workshop. We prepared this Docker image, and we had everybody essentially run the command that's at the bottom there, Docker run, and then blah, blah, blah. Once you do that, it will spin up a Jupyter Hub in your web browser. And so that's the image in the middle here in the left, where you see that you have both an icon that says Julia and one that says Pluto. That is because we provide support for both Jupyter notebooks and Pluto notebooks in this instance. And then on the left in the little file folder, I guess, you see some of the notebooks that I've pre-installed and rerun recently there. So the idea is you should be able to take any of the notebooks from the GitHub and run it in this particular computational environment that we're providing. On the right, again, you have the QR codes for both the web page for the notebooks, and then there's a video for using Docker, which is linked at the bottom. So with all of this, you should be able to either both rewatch the sessions and learn from the speakers how to use the contents. You have access to all of the notebooks, and they rely on data sets that we have tried to archive so that they get downloaded automatically by the notebooks. And then you have a computational environment that's also provided where everything hopefully should work. If not, if any issue pops up, there is always Slack, and there is, you can open an issue on the GitHub repositories, the JuliaEO one mostly. All right. Okay. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the contents. And so the notebook collections, I've broken it down into different topics here. The first one was mostly directed towards the beginners, but also meant to get everybody up to speed with regard to the plotting using Mackie. So Lazaro and Simon sort of ran this part. Mackie, in particular, is my personal preference for plotting in Julia. I think it's very versatile. It has a lot of advantages and a lot of different packages, so that's what we promoted in this workshop. Although some of the notebooks also used the plots package, for example. Then the biggest set of notebooks is the one that's described here, and so this is what has to do with the various file formats and data servers and ways to access Earth observations. And so we talked about the rasters GL package, which Raphael is the lead developer of. Also vector datasets. So I guess the difference between vector and rasters is arrays, if you like. It's just a particular version of it that's popular in Earth observation work. And then we had another session that, again, you can watch on the YouTube channel, where Nathaniel and Alex explained how to get these sort of data sets from Earth observation servers, like the NASA and ESA servers. And to complement this, we had a couple of different sessions on analysis of geospatial data in general, statistics and beyond. So there's a lot there that I think is for me was very insightful. I learned a lot from this, coming from a more oceanography side of things, and so it was really very interesting for me. Then we went into in a different field, which is closer to me, oceanography. We ran a few different sessions on ocean data sets. Starting with Alex, we provided a kind of a showcase for oceanography using Julia. So there we'll see a bunch of different things covered. We had a more specific session later on about regional ocean data, centered around the Azores, and then we went a bit into modeling. So in this first session, we were modeling the way that things move around in the ocean, which is one of the big differences from land, is everything moves. So numerical simulations a little bit, and then we talked about marine ecosystems. The next big topic, which was just discussed in the previous talk, was SAR, so synthetic aperture radar datasets. So there was a whole team of people there that sort of spun up a collaboration on this topic, which I think was one of the great outcomes of this workshop. And something that has always been discussed, so I'm going to move on. And the last chunk is everything having to do with data science. So the use of AI and cloud computing, but also kind of big data type of topics. There was one on data cubes, for example, which is a nice technology for handling large data sets interactively. And then you see there things having to do with classification problems. So applications of these kind of data sets. All right. So this was a long list. I'm just going to isolate a few to give you something a bit more concrete and a bit less dry. So I chose to, it's a bit arbitrary, but I chose to show you the notebook for beginners, which I guess is always a good place to start if you're new to Julia and you want to get deeper into this collection of notebooks and resources. That would be the place where you start. This is a notebook that Lazaro prepared, but he didn't make it just in time, so Simon gave it on the YouTube channel. Again, you have a QR code for that. And then we have a couple of examples here from looking at gridded datasets and polygons, so I guess vector datasets. So what you're seeing on the left is a little exercise where we took a subset of a dataset from, in this case, it's the US version, so it's the NASA version, but there's also the ESA one. So a little kind of data cube, if you like, showing of sea level anomalies from satellite. And then what we did in this notebook is, looking at it interactively, create a little animation from it, and just show how you're going to interact with, one of the most common format that is used in this realm, which is netCDF. You also note that there is contours showing the topography of the land, I guess the topography of the ocean, I should say, and the islands. This is the region of the Azores where we were. So, interacting with two types of data sets. This is another example also from what I know best, which is the oceans. Now looking at a different kind of format, what's called shapefiles, and you have other such file formats that provide polygons. You always use them on land for like countries and things like that. Here, this is an example where the different polygons define regions of the ocean by respect to their biology. And so in this particular case, we were loading a shapefile and then plotting it and doing fairly simple things, but it was good to see all of them sort of converge together. Another session that went deeper into this was the one on rasters.jl. So this was given by Raphael Shannon, who is the lead developer of this package. And so this is a case where we're looking at the land, specifically getting data from a geotiff file, I guess another kind of common file formats that we wanted to cover. And then the rasters.jl package lets you kind of convert between array formats, rasters, and then polygons, and do a series of operations with that. So we get a nice training on how to handle this sort of data sets that for me were fairly new. And then we talked about a bunch of packages that are listed here. So with this session, you learn about the whole ecosystem that is around the JuliaGeo organization in particular. The last two examples that I've taken here are about classification of Earth observations. So that is, now you have a set of maps or images. Here you have images of the land cover at the bottom right. And so this is the training set, if you like, or the set that which you want to classify. And in this session, we took the rasters.jl package and combined that with the flux.jl work and trained a convolutional neural network, something that I had not done before, so I was happy to learn that as well. And this was based on Sentinel-2 data. So the sort of task that people do a lot these days with this kind of data sets, here we illustrated that we can do that all in Julia and have fun with it. Here is a somewhat similar example, but now on the ocean side. So this is using a random forest for the classification. And this was looking at a set of data that comes from the satellite, giving us different spectral bands. And then from that, we can derive a classification of what is in the seawater. This was led by Emmanuel Castaño. And again, you will find it on the GitHub. It should work fine. And I think it's a nice stepping stone for, if you're interested in these sort of activities. All right, I'm getting towards the end of my presentation. So we had a very successful initial workshop, I think. We were quite happy with the turnout and with the outcomes. We have a lot of content that came out of it, and I think we want to also write in a little proceedings paper. So that's one of the things that is coming next from us. The notebook collection is already all there. We intend to maintain it if needs be, and to keep providing a computational environment for it as well. There's a couple things left to do also on the archive for the data sets that we used, that we want to be like permanently archived. And finally, instead of using kind of a standard kind of cloud environment, we also want to be on the Julia Hub to make it easy for anybody to use it that is already in the Julia community. Last, we have the vision of continuing to do this, maybe year after year. The first one, like I said, was January this year, so we've picked the same time period. That's already set. We are not sure yet if we're doing in-person or virtual. It sort of depends on the funding as well. So stay tuned for that. But on this note, I will thank you for your attention and take any question you might have. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Do we have questions from the audience? Yes.
Yeah.
If you do have JuliaEO in person, what are the possible locations?
Well, the most likely would be the same, which would be in the Azores again. Because the lead, or one of the lead here is the Air Center, and that's their location. We've talked about other possibilities, but one of them would be the US. So sort of depending on funding opportunities, I'm sort of picturing this was kind of ESA-centric in terms of the crowd. So I want to propose to NASA to do a version of this, maybe in DC or something like that. But that's up in the air, so I don't want to commit to that. Yeah.
More questions from the audience? Yes.
For these Pluto notebooks, would you suggest any of these to be included in the Pluto report connection? Or we're running a future notebooks contest. Basically, Julia Hub runs a Pluto notebook content that you can submit some of these ideas. And also, Pluto as an open source project has this feature built in. It seems like a nice addition. So would you suggest some of these for any way to win?
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I was aware of the competition, although I'm not sure where to submit. Maybe I will ask you for for details in a minute. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Pluto notebooks. I think they are great in terms of keeping track of dependencies. They have a couple of limitations when you run big workflows in a sense, but you can deal around that. And so yeah, I'm very happy to see Julia Hub and the community really pushing forward on Pluto. Thank you.
More questions? Yes.
There's recent news that Boeing is investing in Julia Hub because of success with Julia. Are you seeing other companies utilizing some of the Julia packages you mentioned here, and you see commercial use of Julia Go?
I'm very much of an academic myself, so I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that question. But what I can say is, this kind of a workshop, in my mind, demonstrated that there is a whole ecosystem that's ready to use for scientific applications, and I would say also for commercial ones. And in fact, I've seen for the past year or two, more and more people in my community kind of engaging and asking questions on that. So folks at NASA, for example. And there's a fair amount of push happening in the background from a few of us, I guess, and more people getting on board. I would say also there is a field of application for this sort of things. There is teaching. My wife happens to be a school teacher, and so we've kind of leveraged some of this to do a little activity with 7th graders. And that's one place where the Pluto notebooks, for example, which you easily turn into web apps, make a real difference. So I think it's ripe for growth also in the commercial sector, but I can't quite speak to that. Yeah.
We do have time for 2 more questions.
Did your participants face any technical issues while doing token exploration or while usage during the setup?
There was an issue with some folks having the most recent Apple computers, because at the time, Docker, I don't think, was supporting M1 or M2 processors somehow. It took a minute to get everybody on the same page with that, partly because, we had suggested people do it beforehand and everybody showed up and then we had to do it in real time. So it did take a minute, but I do think there's a real benefit to doing it that way. Is once you're done, you're kind of done with the technical issues having to do with the environment. And two, Docker is a really useful tool to learn. So I think it was a learning experience for us doing it that way. I think it helped. I think most people were happy with it. There was a couple of hiccups, like linking files into the Docker build. Things we just had to handle. I should say also we had the situation where the Wi-Fi was really bad. So everything that involved installing, and we had like 40 people in the room doing the same thing at the same time, was a bit of a struggle. So we ran around with USB keys a little bit for data sets and even the Docker instances. I don't know if that...
I do have a question.
Yeah, please.
In terms of learning, have you noticed any approach that is better than others? Any best practices that you would recommend for someone that want to build notebooks for Julia teaching, for example?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I do think Julia is really good in terms of being easy to install and to get going. So that's a good start.
It's very readable too.
Yeah, it's easy to interpret. It's not so the language itself, I think, is that's one of the reasons I've adopted it. In fact, is like the communication around the language is easy because of that. I think it's nice to have also interfaces where there is just no code, right? So in terms of exposing Julia to people, I like the idea of giving them a no-code option with like notebooks where you just click. So I think Pluto is really good for that, especially when you turn it into a notebook server where you cannot break the code. On the flip side of that, I think a lot of people are familiar with Jupyter, and that's one of the reasons also I think that Julia can easily be shared with other people that don't know Julia in the first place. And so I think for a large community, starting from a Jupyter hub is a good way to start because they're familiar with it. They've used it for Python or for R or for something else. And it also simplifies a little bit. Well, it avoids complication when things hang because Pluto, as you probably know, everything needs to run fast, right? And so Jupyter is a little easier that way in terms of click, 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 and yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Let's thank our speaker again.
Thank you.